When my daughter married a gold digger who only cared about our family's assets, I knew I had to prepare something unbreakable to protect her. I never told her what was really inside that old storage unit downtown. My son-in-law Lucas always looked at it with contempt. "Dad, why don't you just clear out that pile of junk already?" He has no idea that the rusty unit will be the very thing that defeats him. I've endured his schemes for 3 long years, waiting for this exact moment, the day his trap fails, and the truth finally comes to light. Before we unlock the secret of that storage unit, show your support by hitting the like button and subscribing to join our community. We'd love to know which part of the world you're joining us from today. Please remember, while this story is based on real-life lessons, some names and details have been fictionalized for your entertainment. Stay tuned. The lesson ahead is one you won't want to miss. 1 year after everything fell apart, I'm telling you the story from that year. I'm Vincent Ashford. I'm 64 years old, and I live in Los Angeles, the kind of place where the sun shines most days, where palm trees line the streets, and where people reinvent themselves constantly. That's something I learned the hard way. I've spent a lifetime in this city raising my daughter here after my wife Carol passed away 12 years ago. I thought I'd prepared myself for whatever life might throw at me. Turns out I had no idea what was coming. My daughter is named Sophia. She's 31 now, smart as they come with a good heart, the kind of person who sees the best in people even when she shouldn't. 3 years ago, she married a man named Lucas Torrance. I remember the wedding like it was yesterday. Everything was perfect on the surface. The venue looked beautiful, the flowers smelled like heaven, everyone smiled for the photographs. I stood there watching my daughter walk down the aisle, and I felt something twist in my stomach. It wasn't joy. It was something else entirely. I didn't say anything that day. I smiled, I hugged them both, I gave a toast that made people laugh. But I'd already seen something in Lucas's eyes, a way he looked at Sophia that wasn't quite right. It was possessive, like she was something he owned rather than someone he loved. At that time, I was already keeping a secret. For 12 years since Carol died, I'd been renting a storage unit downtown. Not because I was disorganized or because I didn't have room at home. I rented it because I needed a place, a fortress really, where I could keep the things that mattered most. Carol's documents, her jewelry, the insurance policies, the will, the trust papers that protected Sophia's future. Everything that told the real story of our family's financial life. Most people thought of that storage unit as a place for junk. When I mentioned it in conversation, I'd get that look, the kind that said, "Why would you hold on to all that old stuff?" I let them think that. It was easier that way. But the truth is, I'd spent years assembling a fortress of protection for my daughter. Carol and I had done it together before she passed. We'd created a prenuptial agreement, a family trust, a life insurance policy that would go directly into that trust. We'd made sure Sophia would never be vulnerable no matter what happened in her life. I never told Sophia about any of it. That was the real secret. When she married Lucas, I made sure she didn't have access to that storage unit. I kept the key with me hidden away. I couldn't explain why at the time, not really. I just felt it in my bones. Something about Lucas wasn't right. For the first 2 years of their marriage, I watched. I had dinner with Sophia when she'd let me. I called her regularly. I noticed small things, the way Lucas would steer conversations toward money, the way he'd question her about what I might be leaving her, the way he'd subtly discourage her from spending time with me. I started keeping notes, just little observations in a leather journal I kept in my desk drawer. Then Jacob called. Jacob Winters has been my closest friend for 33 years. He's not the type to panic or exaggerate, so when he called me one afternoon 3 years into Sophia's marriage and told me that he'd overheard Lucas talking to someone about me about how much my insurance was worth, about how it would all go to Sophia, about how much better things would be if I simply didn't exist anymore, I believed him. Jacob isn't a liar, and he wasn't calling to stir up drama. He was calling because he was terrified. That's when I understood. All of those years of silence, all of those hidden documents, all of that protection I'd built around Sophia, it had been for this moment. I didn't know it then, but my life's work had been leading to this single conversation with my oldest friend, where he told me that my son-in-law was capable of something unspeakable. I hung up the phone and sat in my living room for a long time. I thought about Carol. I thought about the way she'd insisted on the prenup, the way she'd insisted on the trust, the way she'd left me notes, letters I'd found after she passed away, that seemed to suggest she knew something I didn't. She'd written things like, "Protect Sophia with documents, not words. Protect her from people who would use love as a weapon." I never understood those letters until that day. And suddenly I realized that I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life. Not consciously, maybe, but every decision I'd made, every precaution I'd taken, every secret I'd kept it, had all been leading here, to this moment where I had to decide what to do with the truth I'd been carrying. I pulled out that leather journal. I looked at 3 years of notes, and I understood finally that it was time to stop watching and start acting. It was time to open that storage unit. It was time to show Sophia what I'd been protecting her from all along. But I had no idea then how far Lucas was willing to go, or how much truth my daughter would have to face in order to survive him. After Jacob's warning, my mind drifted back to the beginning, back to the night when everything started to go wrong. It was that Sunday dinner when Sophia first brought Lucas home. I was standing by the stove when she walked through the door, and I knew it immediately. It took me exactly 15 seconds to realize this man was different from any boyfriend she'd brought around before, and not in a good way. Sophia looked happy. She had that glow people get when they think they've found something real. She introduced Lucas with pride in her voice, her hand finding his automatically. They fit together like two puzzle pieces, at least on the surface. But something in the way Lucas looked at her made my skin crawl. He was handsome, I'll give him that. Tall, dark-haired, well-dressed. The kind of guy who knew how to smile at the right moments and laugh at the right jokes. He complimented the dinner before he'd even tasted it. He asked about my work, about my years in Los Angeles, about the house. All the right questions, all the right timing. But there was something underneath it all, a calculation I could sense, even if I couldn't quite name it. When we sat down to eat, Lucas turned to me with a casual tone. "This is a beautiful home, Vincent. How long have you owned it?" It wasn't a random question. I'd learned to read people after 64 years, and I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He wasn't asking because he was interested in my real estate portfolio. He was assessing, calculating, trying to figure out what I was worth and what he might gain from knowing it. 40 years. I answered, simply cutting into my salmon. "Carol and I bought it together." He nodded, filing that information away like a banker tallying assets. "Must be worth quite a bit now. LA, real estate right, always going up." Sophia laughed nervously. "Lucas, we just got here. Let's enjoy the meal." But I'd already seen it. The way he looked at her when she said his name, like she was a possession he'd already claimed. It wasn't the look of a man in love. It was the look of a man who'd decided what he wanted and was methodically going about getting it. Carol used to talk about this. Years ago, before she got sick, she'd tell me about people who wore charm like a mask. She'd say, "Vincent, love doesn't need to prove itself. Love doesn't calculate. Love doesn't keep score." I remembered those words sitting there at my own dinner table, watching Lucas ask Sophia to pass the butter, while his eyes stayed fixed on me, assessing, measuring. He asked about my work that night, what I did, how long I'd been doing it, whether I was still active or retired. He asked about investments, about whether I traveled much, about whether I had life insurance. The last one caught me off guard, though I didn't show it. He framed it casually, mentioning something about his own policy at work, but the timing felt deliberate. "Everyone should have good coverage," he said, smiling at Sophia. "You never know what life throws at you." Sophia squeezed his hand, completely oblivious to the undercurrent. She was just happy he was getting to know her father. To her, this was a man meeting her family, asking normal questions. She had no idea that every question was a thread he was pulling, trying to map out the territory he'd decided to occupy. After dinner, Lucas helped me clear the table. For a moment, we were alone in the kitchen, and I felt the weight of his attention shift entirely onto me. It was subtle, just a change in the air, a slight hardening of his expression when he thought Sophia couldn't see. You've done well for yourself," he said, loading dishes into the sink. "Sophia's lucky to have this security." There it was. Not "I'm lucky to have Sophia," not "we're going to build something together," but Sophia's lucky to have security. Like that was the point of her existence, to inherit what I'd built. I didn't respond. I just kept rinsing plates and handing them over to him. Later that night, after they'd left, I sat in my study with a glass of whiskey. Carol's photograph was on the shelf above my desk, the one taken on our honeymoon, back when we were young and everything seemed simple. I stared at it for a long time. She would have seen what I saw, that instant recognition of danger. She would have known that Lucas Torrance wasn't interested in my daughter as a person. He was interested in what came with her, the house, the money, the life I'd built. Sophia was just the vehicle to get there. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to say anything to Sophia. Not yet. She wouldn't believe me anyway, not after just one dinner, not when she was already falling for him. And if I spoke up too soon, I'd just push her closer to him. I'd seen it happen 1,000 times, a girl whose father warns her about a boy, and suddenly that girl is determined to prove everyone wrong. So instead, I decided to watch, to listen, to wait. I pulled out a leather journal from my desk drawer, something Carol had given me years ago, back when she insisted on organizing our finances and our future. I opened to a blank page and dated it Sunday first meeting with Lucas Torrance. Then I wrote down everything I'd observed, the questions he'd asked, the way he'd looked at Sophia, the calculation in his eyes, the comment about security. All of it. I told myself I was just being careful, being protective. But deep down, I think I already knew. I think some part of me understood that this wasn't just a boyfriend. This was a threat, and I was beginning a documentation that would 3 years later become the only thing standing between my daughter and something unspeakable. I should have said something that night. I should have pulled Sophia aside and told her what I'd seen in Lucas's eyes. But I didn't know yet how far he was willing to go. I only knew I had to watch, listen, and wait for the moment when I'd need to act. The real warning came 6 months into their marriage. It was subtle, so subtle that Sophia didn't even see it. But I did. It started with a question Lucas asked her one evening. Sophia called me in a voice that sounded different, confused, wounded. She asked if we could talk, and I knew immediately something had shifted. "Dad, Lucas thinks I should know more about the family finances," she said carefully. "He says it's weird that I don't know anything about your money. He thinks you're keeping secrets from me." I felt something cold settle in my chest. This was Lucas's move, calculated. But I kept my voice steady. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't really think about it," Sophia said. "But now I'm wondering, why haven't you told me about your finances, Dad? It does seem kind of strange." Of course, it seemed strange to her. Lucas had made Sophia question me without ever having to voice a direct accusation himself. He'd planted a seed of doubt about her own father. But that wasn't even the worst part. A week later, Sophia called me again. This time she was upset. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course," I said. "What's going on?" Lucas says that Jacob has always had feelings for me. He says Jacob told him that he thinks our marriage is a mistake. He says Jacob wants to break us up because he's still in love with me. I went very still. Jacob, my oldest friend. The man who'd been part of my family for 3 decades. Lucas was lying to my daughter about him, and she was believing it. Sophia, that's not true. Jacob would never. How do you know that, Dad? How do you really know what Jacob says when you're not around? The question landed like a punch. She was actually starting to doubt Jacob now. Lucas had successfully taken one of the most important relationships in her life and poisoned it with a lie. And Sophia, being good-hearted, was starting to believe it. Lucas has no reason to lie to me, she said, defensiveness creeping into her voice. He barely even knows Jacob. Why would he make that up? Because Lucas was systematically isolating my daughter. He was cutting her off from the people who might protect her, who might see what he was doing, who might warn her. And he was doing it so cleverly that Sophia couldn't even see it happening. Over the next few weeks, I watched as Sophia pulled away from Jacob. She didn't return his calls as quickly. She made excuses when he invited us both to dinner. And worst of all, I could see the doubt in her eyes when she looked at him, doubt that Lucas had carefully planted there. This was the moment I really understood what I was dealing with. Lucas wasn't just a gold digger looking for an easy score. He was something more dangerous. He was methodical. He was strategic. He understood psychology in a way that most people don't. He knew exactly how to manipulate my daughter, not through force or aggression, but through seeds of doubt and carefully crafted lies. One night I sat in my study and pulled out that journal, the one I'd started after that first Sunday dinner. I flipped past my initial observations about Lucas's questions, his calculating eyes, his comment about security. Those had seemed ominous, but they were nothing compared to what I was witnessing now. I wrote down everything. The conversation Sophia had reported about Lucas questioning my finances, the lie about Jacob, the way Sophia was starting to pull away from my oldest friend, the isolation tactics happening in real time, and as I wrote, something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't just about money, though money was certainly part of it. This was about control. Lucas wanted to control Sophia completely, her mind, her relationships, her sense of reality. He wanted to make sure that when the moment came where she needed someone to tell her the truth, there would be no one left to turn to. Her father would seem like he was keeping secrets. Her best friend would seem like he had ulterior motives. And Lucas would be the only person she could trust. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, and it was happening to my daughter in real time. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Lucas. I wasn't going to try to convince Sophia that he was lying. I'd learned enough about manipulation to know that would only drive her closer to him. Instead, I was going to document everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every calculated move he made. I was going to build a record that would eventually show Sophia the truth. I started writing in that journal every single night. I'd note down conversations Sophia had mentioned. I'd record my own observations. I'd track the timeline of when Lucas made particular moves, what he said, how Sophia reacted. It was methodical work, the kind of work that required patience and focus. At the time, I didn't know exactly why I was doing this. I didn't have a specific plan. I just knew in some deep part of myself that I was going to need this evidence. That someday, in some way, I couldn't yet imagine my daughter would need to see the truth laid out in black and white. And when that day came, I wanted to be ready. I had no idea then that Lucas's isolation tactics were just the beginning. I had no idea that the next 3 years would involve so much more than psychological games and careful lies. I had no idea what he was truly capable of. But that night I made a choice. I would watch, I would document. And when the time came, and I was starting to believe that time would come, I would be ready to protect my daughter no matter what it cost me. I drove to the storage unit the next morning and pulled out an old leather journal. It had been sitting there for 12 years untouched. I'd bought it years ago thinking maybe I'd write about the time I spent with Carol. I never did. Now I opened it to the first blank page. The leather was soft, worn in places. I uncapped a pen and looked at the empty page in front of me. For a moment, I just sat there in that climate-controlled storage unit surrounded by boxes of my life trying to figure out how to begin. I dated the first entry May 15, 2021. Then I wrote Sophia seemed distant today. Lucas must have said something to her. That was how it started. One observation, one sentence. But I knew even then that this journal would become something important. So I committed to it. Every week I'd come to the storage unit and write down what I'd seen, what I'd heard, what I'd noticed. By June, the entries had become more detailed. June 3rd. I watched Lucas touch Sophia's arm when she laughed too hard at something I said. She was happy. He didn't like that. The touch wasn't affection, it was a signal, a subtle reminder that he was there watching, controlling even her joy. July 12th. Lucas checked Sophia's phone while she was in the bathroom. He did it like it was nothing, like he had every right. When she came back, he smiled at her like nothing had happened. She had no idea. August 8th. Lucas said to Sophia, "Your father doesn't understand us. He's too old to see what we have." And I watched my daughter nod. I watched her accept that I was the enemy, that he was the only one who truly cared about her. The pattern started to emerge around September. It wasn't random. It wasn't occasional moments of jealousy or insecurity. It was systematic, methodical, deliberate. September 20th. Lucas insisted Sophia's yoga class was a waste of money. She didn't argue. She just accepted it. I'm starting to see the bigger picture now. It's not just about money or control of her time. It's about erasing her sense of self. Every no he gives her, every decision he makes for her, every opinion he corrects. It's all part of the same pattern. October 5th. I overheard Lucas on the phone. He was talking about Sophia's future, about inheritance, about how much better their life would be when her old man was gone. Those were his exact words. I felt something cold move through my chest. October turned into November, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. I filled page after page with observations, dates, specific moments. Lucas controlled what Sophia wore. He controlled who she saw. He controlled how much money she had access to. He controlled her schedule, her phone, her relationships. But it was more than that. He controlled the narrative. He controlled what she thought about me, about Jacob, about herself. He'd told her I was keeping secrets. He'd told her Jacob wanted to destroy their marriage. He'd told her she was lucky to have him, that no one else would love her like he did. November 15th. 3 patterns clearly established. First, isolation. Lucas has successfully cut Sophia off from everyone who might protect her. Second, financial control. He knows every dollar she has. Third, psychological manipulation. He's rewired how she thinks about the people who love her. November 28th. But there's a fourth pattern emerging, and this one scares me the most. Lucas is asking more questions about my life, my work, my insurance, my assets. This isn't just about loving my daughter anymore. This is about something else entirely. By December, I'd filled almost 200 pages. 200 pages of observations, dates, times, specific quotes. 200 pages documenting the careful, calculated way Lucas was dismantling my daughter's independence and replacing it with dependence on him. I sat in the storage unit on December 15, 2021, and read through an entire year of entries. The pattern was unmistakable. It was clear. It was undeniable. Lucas wasn't a boyfriend who'd gotten a little too controlling. He wasn't a husband with jealousy issues. He was something far more calculated. He was a predator, and he was following a specific playbook that he'd likely used before, would likely use again. The isolation had happened first, then the financial control, then the psychological manipulation, and now the targeting, the questions about my money, the comments about how much better things would be when I was gone. I didn't know where this was heading. I didn't know what Lucas was truly capable of. But as I sat there in that cold storage unit surrounded by evidence, I understood something with complete certainty. I was watching a pattern unfold in real time, and I had no idea how it would end. But I knew one thing absolutely. I knew that I had to be ready for whatever came next. Because patterns like this, patterns of control, of isolation, of psychological destruction, they don't stop on their own. They don't reach a plateau where the person gets comfortable and decides that's enough. Patterns like this escalate. They intensify. They grow darker and more dangerous with every passing month. And I had a sinking feeling that the worst was still to come. 3 years. That's how long I watched. 3 years of family dinners where Lucas smiled and played the perfect son-in-law. 3 years of filling that leather journal with his behavior. 3 years of staying silent because I didn't have enough proof to make anyone believe me. It wasn't easy. Those 3 years were a study in restraint. Every Sunday dinner, every phone call, every time Sophia mentioned something Lucas had said or done, I had to bite my tongue. I had to smile and pretend everything was fine while documenting the slow destruction of my daughter's life in that journal locked away in the storage unit. Lucas became bolder as time went on. The isolation deepened. By year 2, Sophia had virtually no friends left. Lucas had systematically poisoned every relationship with lies. He told her that her college friends were jealous of her marriage. He said her work colleagues were trying to manipulate her. He convinced her that everyone wanted to see them fail, and Sophia believed him. The control over money intensified too. By the 3rd year, Lucas had taken over her paychecks completely. She couldn't buy a coffee without him knowing about it. When she asked why, he'd say it was because they were building a future together, and trust meant transparency. It sounded romantic when he said it, but it was control, pure and simple. I watched Sophia become smaller. The light in her eyes dimmed. She laughed less. She questioned herself more. When she came to my house for dinners, which became less and less frequent, she seemed like a shadow of the daughter I'd raised. And the bruises started appearing in year 2. The first one was on her arm. She said she'd fallen. The next was on her hip. A car door, she claimed. Then there was a bruise on her thigh that she said came from bumping into the bed frame. Each time there was an explanation. Each time it sounded more implausible than the last. But Sophia delivered these stories without hesitation, like Lucas had rehearsed them with her. Then came the bruises on her face. A misunderstanding with a door. A clumsy moment at home. Stories that didn't hold up to scrutiny, but which Sophia delivered with the conviction of someone who'd been told to believe them. Every time I saw a new bruise, something inside me wanted to explode. I wanted to grab Sophia and drag her away from him. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to do something, anything, to stop what was happening to my daughter. But I couldn't. Not without proof that people would believe. I'd seen this before. The more the father intervenes, the more the daughter defends her abuser. The more we try to save them, the more they cling to the person hurting them. So I did what I could do. I documented. I wrote down dates. I recorded observations. I filled that journal with evidence, page after page, year after year. I was building a case that I hoped someday I wouldn't need to use. Jacob stayed present during those 3 years. He'd call me regularly, checking in. He'd mention how worried he was about Sophia. He'd noticed things too. The isolation, the fear in her eyes, the way Lucas always had his hand on her somewhere, always maintaining contact, always reminding her he was there. "See, Vincent, something's wrong," Jacob said to me more than once. "I can feel it. This isn't normal." I knew he was right. But what could we do without proof? What could we say that wouldn't backfire? By year 3, I'd filled nearly 800 pages. The journal was thick with my observations, my fears, my documentation of Lucas's systematic abuse. I had dates. I had times. I had direct quotes. I had a timeline showing the escalation from psychological manipulation to physical violence. But I still couldn't move. Not yet. The worst part was watching Sophia defend him. Because that's what happens when someone is being abused like that. They protect their abuser. They make excuses for him. They blame themselves when he hurts them. I'd try to reach out. "Sophia, how are you really doing?" I'd ask during our rare phone calls. "I'm fine, Dad. Everything's great. Lucas just wants the best for us. He's so protective." Protective. That's what she called the cage he'd built around her. 3 years of watching. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of knowing that something had to give, but not knowing what I could do to make it happen without destroying everything. And then one afternoon, Jacob called me. His voice was different, serious, urgent in a way I'd never heard before. "Vincent, we need to talk," he said. "I need to see you, today, because I saw something and I think you need to know about it." My heart dropped. I'd been waiting for 3 years for something to shift. I'd been documenting everything, preparing for the moment when I'd need to act. But I'd never expected it to come from Jacob. "What did you see?" I asked. "Not over the phone," Jacob said. "We need to meet in person. And Vincent, I think it's worse than we thought." Those words changed everything. Because Jacob had finally seen what I'd been documenting all along. He'd finally witnessed something so undeniable that he couldn't look away anymore. After 3 years of silence, after 3 years of watching and waiting and preparing, someone else had finally seen the truth. And I realized that everything I'd been doing, all that documentation, all that patience, all that careful recording of evidence, it had all been leading to this moment. This phone call, this shift, the moment when everything was about to change. I met Jacob at a small cafe near my house. He looked worried in a way I recognized immediately. It was the same expression I'd been wearing for 3 years. He was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived, a cup of coffee in front of him that he wasn't drinking. His hands were folded tight like he was trying to hold something in. When he saw me, he stood up, and we embraced the kind of hug that only happens between men who've known each other long enough to drop the pretense. "Vincent," he said, sitting back down. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course. What's going on, Jacob? You sounded urgent on the phone." He took a deep breath. For a moment, he just looked at his coffee. Then he started talking. "I've been trying to help Sophia," he said quietly. "For months now, I've tried to reach out to her to let her know I'm here if she needs me. But every time I try, she pushes me away. And I finally understand why." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Lucas has told her things about me," Jacob said, pain crossing his face. "He's convinced her that I have ulterior motives, that I've always had feelings for her, that I'm trying to come between them, and she believes him. She actually believes that I'm the bad guy in this situation." I nodded slowly. This was exactly what I documented in my journal, the systematic poisoning of Jacob's relationship with Sophia. But hearing it from Jacob himself, seeing the hurt in his eyes, made it real in a way that my written observations couldn't capture. "That's not all," Jacob continued. "Vincent, I've been paying closer attention lately, and I'm seeing things that scare me. Sophia looks diminished, like a version of herself that's shrinking. And the way Lucas watches her, the way he controls every interaction she has, it's not love. It's something else." "I know," I said quietly. Jacob looked up at me. "You know," I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at him, this man who'd been my friend for 33 years, who'd always been there for me, who'd kept showing up for Sophia even when she pushed him away. I made a decision in that moment. "Jacob, I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen without interrupting until I'm finished." For the next 20 minutes, I told him everything. I told him about the journal. I told him about the 3 years of documentation. I told him about the dates, the observations, the escalation from psychological manipulation to physical violence. I told him about the bruises and the lies Sophia told to cover them up. I told him about the isolation and the financial control, and the way Lucas had systematically dismantled my daughter's sense of self. When I finished, Jacob was silent. His face had gone pale. 3 years, he finally said. You've been documenting this for 3 years. I needed proof, I said. I needed to know I wasn't imagining things. I needed to have something concrete before I tried to convince anyone else. Why didn't you tell me? Jacob asked, and there was hurt in his voice. Hurt that I'd carried this alone. Because I didn't want to drag you into something you couldn't fix, I said honestly. And I wasn't sure if it was safe. I wasn't sure who Lucas might try to manipulate or threaten. I was trying to protect you. Jacob shook his head. Vincent, you should have told me. We could have done this together. You shouldn't have had to carry this alone. I know, I said. I know that now. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. What do you need from me? I need your help, I said. Sophia won't believe me. She thinks I'm keeping secrets from her that I don't understand her marriage. But she might believe you. She might listen to you in a way she won't listen to me. I'll do whatever it takes, Jacob said immediately. Whatever you need, I'll watch him. I'll gather evidence. I'll be there for Sophia, whatever it takes. There's more, I said. I think Lucas might be planning something bigger. I heard him mention my life insurance. I heard him talk about how much better things would be when I was gone. Jacob, I think he might be planning to hurt me. Jacob's face hardened. Then we need to move faster. We need to get Sophia away from him before this escalates any further. Agreed, I said. But we have to be careful. We can't just confront him. We need to be strategic about this. We need to make sure Sophia understands what's happening before we take action. Okay, Jacob said, and I could see the determination settling into his features. Then let's do this. Tell me everything, every detail, every observation. We're going to build a case so airtight that Sophia won't have any choice but to see the truth. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't alone anymore. Someone else knew. Someone else understood. Someone else was willing to fight for my daughter. Jacob and I spent the next 3 hours at that cafe, going through my documentation, reviewing the timeline, discussing strategy. We talked about how to approach Sophia, how to present the evidence in a way that wouldn't make her defensive, how to protect her if Lucas reacted badly. And as the afternoon light shifted through the cafe windows, I realized something fundamental had changed. I'd spent 3 years watching and documenting in isolation. But now with Jacob beside me, I understood that this fight wasn't mine alone to fight. We were in this together. 2 men who loved Sophia. 2 men who'd finally decided that the time for documentation was over. The time for action was beginning, because now there were 2 of us who knew the truth. And that changed everything. 3 weeks after Jacob and I made our plan, he called me with words that turned my blood to ice. Vincent, he said, and I could hear the alarm in his voice. I just ran into Sophia at the grocery store. Vincent, she has bruises on her arms. Dark bruises. And when I asked her about them, she said Lucas told her that if she told you about anything, he'd hurt you. I went very still. For 3 years, I'd documented the escalation. I'd watched it unfold in my journal page after page. But this was different. This was a threat against me. This was Lucas crossing a line he couldn't uncross. Tell me exactly what she said, I said quietly. Jacob recounted the conversation. Sophia had tried to brush off the bruises at first, giving some excuse about falling, but Jacob had pressed gently, and she'd finally broken. She'd told him that Lucas had gotten angry with her over something trivial. She'd laughed too loud at something on her phone. Lucas had grabbed her arms hard enough to leave marks, and then he'd said the words that had terrified her more than anything else. Hadi, if you tell your father about this, I'll make sure he pays for it. One way or another, he'll regret ever trying to take you away from me. I'm coming to get her, I said immediately. Give me the address. Vincent, what are you going to do? Jacob asked. I'm going to bring my daughter home, I said. Tonight. I hung up the phone and sat for a moment in the silence of my house. My hands were shaking. For 3 years, I'd maintained a kind of controlled anger, a focused, documented rage that I'd channeled into the journal, into evidence, into preparation. But this was different. This was a man threatening my life while he beat my daughter. This was someone who'd crossed from psychological abuse into physical violence and intimidation. This was someone who'd made a fatal mistake by putting his threat into words, giving Jacob a witness, giving me something concrete. At that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. This wasn't about protecting Sophia from a manipulative boyfriend anymore. This wasn't about careful documentation and legal strategy. This was about survival, her survival. I stood up and grabbed my keys. I didn't think about what I'd say to Lucas. I didn't formulate a plan. I just knew that I needed to get to my daughter. I needed to get her away from that apartment, away from that man, away from someone who was willing to hurt her and threaten me to keep control. As I drove toward the address Jacob had given me, my mind was racing. I thought about the 3 years of documentation. I thought about the 800 pages in that journal. I thought about every bruise, every lie, every moment of isolation I'd watched Lucas inflict on my daughter. And I thought about the fact that all of that preparation, all of that patience had been leading to this moment, this night, this drive toward my daughter's apartment. The city lights blurred past as I navigated the streets. Sophia and Lucas lived about 30 minutes from my house in a condo near Malibu. It was meant to be a beautiful place. Lucas had been so proud of it when they'd bought it. But I'd always known it was a cage. A beautiful oceanfront cage that kept my daughter isolated from everyone who could help her. I thought about what I'd do when I got there. Would Lucas even let me in? Would he try to stop me? Would there be a confrontation? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't leave Sophia there another night. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't wait for the perfect legal moment. The time for waiting was over. My phone buzzed. A text from Jacob Drive Safe. "I'm here for you. Whatever happens, you're not doing this alone." Those words steadied me. Jacob was right. I wasn't alone. I had documentation. I had a witness. I had 3 years of evidence. I had a friend who was willing to stand with me. But more than that, I had clarity about what needed to happen. Lucas had made his intentions clear. He'd threatened my life to keep control of my daughter, and I was going to extract her from that situation, whatever it took. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I drove. The ocean came into view, dark and vast under the night sky. Somewhere ahead, in a condo overlooking that water, my daughter was living in fear, and I was going to bring her home. But as I drove, another thought crept in. A darker thought. I'd been so focused on what I needed to do, on retrieving Sophia, on protecting her, on finally taking action after 3 years, that I hadn't fully considered one thing. How far was Lucas willing to go to keep her? I didn't know what I was walking into. I didn't know if he'd fight me physically. I didn't know if he'd try to convince Sophia not to leave. I didn't know what desperation might drive him to do. All I knew was that I had to try. All I knew was that my daughter was in danger, and every minute I delayed was another minute she was under his roof in his hands. I pulled up to the condo building just before 9 o'clock that night. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering myself. 3 years of observation, 3 years of documentation, 3 years of preparation. And now finally the moment had come where all of that had to become action. I got out of the car and walked toward the building. I didn't know exactly what was about to happen, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: tonight, everything was going to change, because Lucas had made a critical error. He'd threatened me. And in doing so, he'd given me permission to stop being patient, to stop being careful, to stop documenting and start acting. I was coming to get my daughter, and I had no idea what Lucas was willing to do to stop me. After Sophia let me in, and I saw those bruises with my own eyes, I made a decision. It was time. Time to show my daughter what I knew. Time to show Jacob the full extent of Lucas's behavior. Time to open that leather journal and lay everything bare. I called Jacob immediately. "Come to Sophia's apartment," I said. "Bring your keys. We're getting her out tonight." 20 minutes later, the three of us were sitting in Sophia's living room. I'd retrieved the journal from my car. I'd brought it with me, knowing instinctively that tonight would be the night I'd need it. Sophia looked at that worn leather book in my hands with confusion. "What is that, Dad?" "The truth," I said quietly. "Everything I've documented, everything I've seen, everything Lucas has done to you." I opened to the first entry and started reading aloud. June 3rd, 2021. Lucas told Sophia that her father doesn't understand love. He said his controlling behavior is normal. He said it's just how people who truly care act. Sophia's face went pale. I kept reading. September 12th, 2021. Sophia stopped mentioning her friends. Lucas made her choose. Him or them. She chose him. She always chooses him. It's October 14th, 2021. I watched Lucas check Sophia's phone while she was in the bathroom. She came back and thanked him for caring so much. She called it protection. I turned more pages. Each entry was a brick in a wall of evidence. Each date, each observation, each direct quote was a documented moment of manipulation, control, and escalation. February 14th, 2023. I saw Sophia flinch when Lucas raised his voice. Valentine's Day. He was angry because she'd spent too much time on her phone. She apologized for upsetting him. March 8th, 2023. Sophia mentioned that Lucas pushed her into a wall. She called it an intense moment. She said she deserved it for talking back. As I read, I watched my daughter's face. I watched the realization dawn. I watched her remember things she'd tried to forget. The bruises she'd explained away. The isolation she'd accepted. The blame she'd internalized. Tears started streaming down her face. "Dad," she whispered, "you've been documenting this the whole time." 3 years, I said. Every observation, every conversation, every bruise, every lie. Jacob stood up, anger radiating off him. 800 pages, he said, looking at the journal in my hands. He's been doing this to her for 800 pages. I continued reading methodically, working through the journal. I read about the financial control, about how Lucas had systematically isolated her from everyone who cared about her, about how he'd poisoned her mind, against me, against Jacob, against anyone who might see what he was doing. I read specific dates and specific incidents. The moment he'd told her that I was keeping secrets. The moment he'd lied about Jacob. The moment he'd started checking her phone. The moment the first bruise appeared. The moment the bruises became more frequent. Each entry was a stepping stone in a path that led directly here to this night, to this moment, where my daughter finally saw the truth laid out in front of her. When I finished, there was a heavy silence in the room. "I don't understand," Sophia said, her voice small and broken. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said gently. Not without seeing the pattern. Not without understanding that this isn't random. This isn't love. This is a calculated campaign of control. "What do you mean?" Jacob asked, though I could see he already understood. "There are 4 patterns," I said, laying out the evidence like a prosecutor presenting a case. First, isolation. Lucas cut Sophia off from everyone who might protect her or see what he was doing. Second, financial control. He took over her money, her paychecks, her ability to make independent choices. Third, psychological manipulation. He rewired how she thinks about the people who love her, made her doubt me, doubt you, Jacob, doubt herself. And fourth, physical violence. When the other 3 weren't enough to keep her compliant, he escalated to hurting her. Sophia was shaking. Jacob put his hand on her shoulder. "This isn't your fault," I said to my daughter. None of this is your fault. You didn't cause this. You didn't deserve this. This is what he chose to do. But I believed him. Sophia said, her voice breaking. I believed everything he told me. That's what abusers do. Jacob said, his voice hard with anger. They make you believe lies. They make you feel crazy for questioning them. They make you think you're the problem. I closed the journal. There were still hundreds of pages left unread, but Sophia had seen enough. She understood now. She understood the scope of what had been done to her. She understood that it wasn't her imagination. It wasn't her fault. It was a deliberate, calculated pattern of abuse designed to break her down and make her completely dependent on a man who didn't love her, who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. Sophia looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. What happens now? Now, I said, we get you somewhere safe. We make a plan. We protect you. But even as I said it, I felt a shadow of something else. Something I hadn't told them. Something that was still unfolding in ways I couldn't predict. Because the documentation I'd done, the evidence I'd gathered, it only told part of the story. It showed what Lucas had done. But it didn't show what he was planning to do. It didn't show the depths of his desperation or the lengths he might go to in order to keep control. And as I looked at my daughter finally seeing the truth, I realized something that chilled me to my core. The worst part wasn't in that journal. The worst part was still coming. About 2 months after that night, Lucas made his move. He had Sophia ask me about the house. Not to live in, to own. He wanted ownership. He wanted the asset. He wanted everything. I was in my study when Sophia called. Her voice sounded different, coached, rehearsed. Dad, I need to talk to you about something, she said carefully. Lucas and I have been thinking. We need a bigger place. We want to build a life together and the condo isn't enough. We were wondering if you'd consider helping us with the house. I knew exactly what this was. I documented conversations where Lucas had talked about my house. I'd written down the moment he'd realized it was worth nearly $1 million. I'd noted the exact date when his eyes had changed when he'd started calculating how to get his hands on it. Sophia, I'm not going to give you my house, I said calmly. That's not going to happen. There was silence on the other end. Then I heard Lucas's voice in the background, angry, demanding, telling her what to say next. Why not? Sophia asked, and now there was desperation in her voice. Why won't you help your own daughter? Because your house isn't mine to give away, I said. And because I know what this is really about. I hung up the phone. 2 hours later, Lucas called me directly. This was new. This was a shift. He'd never called me before. He'd always worked through Sophia. Listen here. He said, his voice cold and sharp. You're being selfish. Your daughter needs your help, and you're refusing because you're a controlling old man who can't stand to see her happy. That's not what this is about, I said. You know what you are. Lucas continued, his voice rising. You're a coward. You hide behind your money and your secrets, and you won't even help your own child. You're the reason she's unhappy. You're the reason we're struggling. I stayed silent. I'd learned long ago not to engage with his manipulation. I'm taking care of your daughter, he said. I'm the one who loves her. I'm the one who's there for her. And you sit in that big house of yours, judging us, keeping us poor, keeping us down. You're pathetic. Is there anything else? I asked quietly. Yeah, there's one more thing, he said, and his voice had turned into something darker, something more dangerous. You need to understand that I'm not going anywhere. Sophia is mine. That house should be ours. And if you don't start cooperating, you're going to regret it. Then he hung up. I sat in the silence of my study for a long moment, letting his words settle. And in that silence, something became crystal clear to me. Lucas had run out of subtle tactics. He was out of manipulation tricks. He'd moved past the psychological games and the careful control. Now he was using direct aggression, direct threats, direct intimidation, and that meant he was desperate. A desperate man is a dangerous man. A man who's losing control will do things he wouldn't normally consider. A man who can see his plans crumbling will escalate to whatever means necessary to try to save them. Lucas had thought he had all the time in the world. He'd thought he could isolate Sophia, break her down, make her completely dependent on him, and eventually convince her to help him access her father's assets. He'd been executing a long game, but I'd shortened that timeline. By showing Sophia the journal, by helping her see the pattern, by refusing to give in to his demands, I'd accelerated everything. I'd removed the cushion of time he'd been counting on. Now he was panicking. Now he was showing his true face, and now I knew with absolute certainty that things were going to get much worse before they got better. I picked up my phone and called Stephen Garrett, the family lawyer. The same man I'd consulted with years ago when Carol and I had set up the prenuptial agreement and the trust. "Stephen, it's Vincent," I said when he answered. "We need to talk about Lucas Torrance, and I need you to understand something. I think he might be planning to do something illegal." I spent the next hour on the phone with Stephen going through everything. The journal, the documentation, the escalation from psychological abuse to physical violence, to direct threats, the attempt to pressure Sophia into helping him access my assets. "Now, you need to file a restraining order," Stephen said firmly, "and you need to do it now. This man is escalating, and escalation patterns like this don't stop on their own." "I know," I said. "I've been watching him escalate for 3 years." "Then you know what comes next," Stephen said. "You know that desperate men do desperate things." After I hung up with Stephen, I sat in my study and thought about everything that was coming. A restraining order would anger Lucas further. It would back him into a corner. It would force him to make a choice, except that he'd lost or escalate to something even more dangerous. I didn't know which way he'd go, but I knew that the time for documentation was truly over now. The time for careful observation had ended. Now it was time for legal action, time for protection, time for preparation, because Lucas had finally shown me his true face, and what I'd seen was a man capable of anything. That night, I made calls to the lawyer, to Jacob, to a private investigator I'd worked with years ago. I began the process of building legal walls around myself and my daughter. I started the paperwork for a restraining order. I made sure that everyone who needed to know understood that Lucas Torrance was dangerous. And I understood finally that the house had never really been about shelter. 3 weeks after I'd filed the restraining order, I received a call from Morris Reed, the manager at Secure Vault Storage. "To Mr. Ashford," he said, and I could hear the concern in his voice. "We've had an incident. Someone tried to cut the lock on your unit." My blood went cold. "Tell me what happened." "A man came in this morning around 11 o'clock. He didn't have access to the building. He came in through an unsecured side door. He went directly to your unit number 247, and he had bolt cutters. When I confronted him, he got aggressive, started yelling about how the unit belonged to his wife, how he had every right to access it. I told him to leave, and when he wouldn't, I called security." "And did he say his name?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He wouldn't give one, but the security footage should have him on camera. He was tall, dark hair, probably mid-30s, very angry. The kind of angry that suggested he knew exactly what he was looking for. "Lucas." It was definitely Lucas. "What did he do when you told him to leave?" I asked. "He left, but not before threatening me. Said he'd be back. Said he knew what was in that unit, and that I couldn't stop him from accessing his wife's inheritance." My mind raced. Lucas had found the storage unit. Somehow, some way he'd tracked down the location. And he was desperate enough to attempt a break-in in broad daylight with security cameras recording everything. Morris, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said. That man is not to be allowed access to my unit under any circumstances, not for any reason. If he comes back, if anyone matching that description comes back, I want you to call the police immediately. Do you understand? Yes, sir. I'll make sure of it. Should I increase security? Yes. And I'm going to call the police right now to report this. I hung up and immediately dialed the local police department's non-emergency line. I reported the attempted break-in, provided a description of Lucas, and explained the situation. The officer took my information and promised to file a report. With the restraining order already in place, an attempted break-in was a clear violation. Then I called Jacob. Lucas tried to break into the storage unit, I said without preamble. There was silence on the other end. Then this morning, he had bolt cutters. The manager stopped him, but he's threatening to come back. Hi, Jesus, Jacob breathed. Vincent, he's escalating. He's desperate. I know, I said, which means he's running out of options. And desperate men make mistakes. But even as I said it, I understood the implications. Lucas had discovered the one thing I'd been protecting most carefully. He didn't know what was inside that unit he couldn't know, because I'd been obsessively secretive about it. But he knew it was important. He knew it was the key to something, and he was willing to commit a crime to access it. That told me everything I needed to know about how desperate he'd become. The storage unit had been my insurance policy, my fail-safe, the place where I'd gathered 3 years of evidence, the place where I'd kept all the documents that protected my daughter, the prenuptial agreement, the trust documents, the insurance policies, the copies of wills, the place where I'd stored Carol's legacy and her warnings. Lucas couldn't know that. But somehow he'd figured out that whatever was in that unit was a threat to him. I spent the rest of the day making phone calls. I contacted Stephen Garrett and told him about the attempted break-in. He immediately began the process of adding it to the legal case against Lucas. I called the private investigator and asked him to increase surveillance of Lucas's movements. I checked with the storage unit manager twice more to make sure everything was secure. And I realized something crucial. The storage unit was no longer just a place of safekeeping. It had become a focal point, a flashpoint. The place where everything was going to come to a head. Lucas knew something was there. He didn't know what, but he knew it was important enough that he was willing to risk arrest to access it. He knew it was connected to Sophia's inheritance, to money, to control, and he was willing to escalate from psychological abuse and physical violence to committing crimes. The attempted break-in was the moment when Lucas stopped pretending to be anything other than what he was. He stopped playing the role of the loving husband. He stopped bothering with the subtle manipulation. Now he was just a desperate man with bolt cutters willing to do whatever it took to get what he wanted. That night I drove to the storage unit myself. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I wanted to confirm that my documentation, my evidence, my carefully gathered proof of 3 years of abuse, all of it was still there, still safe, still waiting. I pulled into the climate-controlled facility and walked to Unit 247. Everything was intact. The lock was still secure, uncut. Inside, I could see the boxes, the ones containing Carol's belongings, the ones containing my journal, the ones containing the legal documents that protected everything my wife and I had built. Lucas hadn't gotten inside. But he'd confirmed something crucial. He knew the unit existed, and he knew it mattered, which meant that time was no longer on my side, which meant that Lucas would keep trying, which meant that whatever was going to happen next would happen soon. I locked the unit and walked back to my car. As I drove home, I thought about the pattern I'd documented for 3 years: isolation, financial control, psychological manipulation, physical violence. And now desperation. Desperation was the final stage. And desperation was the most dangerous. Because a desperate man with nothing left to lose would do things that a calculating man would never consider. A desperate man would stop calculating the consequences and start thinking only about survival. And I had no idea what Lucas would do when he realized that the storage unit was his last chance, his last hope of accessing the leverage he needed to control my daughter and secure his future. That's when I called Jacob. I told him we needed to meet immediately, because I'd just realized something that changed everything. We sat in my study with the door closed. "The storage unit break-in attempt," I said. "That wasn't random. That was desperation. That was a man running out of time and running out of options." Jacob leaned forward. "You think he's planning something bigger?" "I know it," I said. "I've spent 3 years documenting this man's behavior. I've watched him escalate from psychological manipulation to physical violence. And we're at a threshold now. We've crossed into a new territory." "What do you mean?" Jacob asked. "But Lucas has lost control," I said. "He tried to manipulate Sophia and she saw through it. He tried to intimidate me and I didn't back down. He tried to access the storage unit and he failed. Every move he's made recently has resulted in him losing ground. And men like Lucas, men who've built their entire identity on control, they don't handle losing well." I stood up and walked to the window. The night was dark outside. When a man like that realizes he's losing everything, he doesn't try to negotiate anymore. He escalates to the only option he has left: elimination. "You think he's planning to hurt you?" Jacob said. It wasn't a question. "Mo, I know he is," I said. "I can feel it. And he believes he can get away with it. He thinks that if I'm gone, Sophia will be vulnerable again. He thinks without me there's no one to protect her." Jacob stood up. "We need to go to the police." "Based on what?" I asked. "An attempted break-in overheard conversations from years ago. They won't do anything." "Then what do we do?" Jacob asked. "We prepare," I said. "We gather more evidence. We make it impossible for him to act without consequences." I picked up my phone and called the private investigator. "I need you to put full surveillance on Lucas Torrance, 24 hours a day. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he talks to. And if he makes any calls about insurance, about money, about me, I want to know immediately." Over the next few days, Jacob and I developed a plan. We arranged for him to check in with me daily. We coordinated with the private investigator to keep Lucas under constant surveillance. I varied my routines, taking different routes, changing my schedule. I increased security at my house: new locks, motion sensors, security cameras. I slept poorly. Every sound made me alert, but I was also calm. Because I'd spent 3 years preparing for this. I'd documented everything. I'd gathered evidence. I'd built a case. One night, I sat in my study and pulled out the leather journal. I flipped through the pages. 3 years of observations, 3 years of documentation, 3 years of watching a man systematically destroy my daughter's life. And now I realized we were at the end of that story. The ending was approaching. And it wouldn't be quiet. It wouldn't be subtle. It would be violent in whatever way Lucas chose to make it. I called Stephen Garrett, my lawyer. "I want to make sure that if anything happens to me, everything is in order. I want Sophia protected. I want the storage unit secured. I want my documentation to be found and understood." Vincent, are you in danger?" Stephen asked directly. "Well, I think so," I admitted. "I think Lucas is planning something. And I want to make sure that even if something happens to me, the truth comes out." I spent that night making arrangements. I left copies of my journal with Stephen, with Jacob, with the private investigator. I updated my will. I made sure that everything I documented would survive me even if I didn't. Because I understood finally that I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life. Not consciously, maybe. But every decision I'd made, every precaution I'd taken, every document I'd kept it, had all been leading here. To this moment where I was ready. Jacob called me the next morning. The investigator called me. Lucas has been making calls. To someone. Multiple calls. Very careful. Very deliberate. What kind of calls? I asked. He's asking questions about your schedule, Jacob said. About where you go. About your routines. I felt a chill run through me. But I wasn't afraid. I was ready, because I'd finally reached the moment I'd been preparing for all along. The moment when everything would come to a head. When Lucas would make his move. When the careful plan he'd been executing for 3 years would either succeed or fail. And I was going to make sure it failed. That same night after my conversation with Jacob, I couldn't sleep. So I drove alone to the storage unit. I hadn't been there in months. I needed to remind myself of what I'd built, what I'd protected. The climate-controlled unit was exactly as I'd left it. 10 feet by 10 feet. Organized in a way that only I understood. To anyone else, it would look like a mess. Boxes stacked haphazardly, old furniture pushed into corners. The accumulated clutter of a man who couldn't let go of his past. But I knew the truth. I walked through the unit slowly, deliberately. I passed through the outer layers, first the deliberate camouflage. Boxes of Carol's old clothes, her winter coats, her shoes arranged in pairs, as if she might come back and wear them again. Stacks of books she'd loved. Photo albums from before Sophia was born. Memories wrapped in tissue paper and stored in cardboard boxes. It was genuine, all of it. Carol's things preserved exactly as they'd been when she was alive. The outer layer of my storage unit was authentic mourning, authentic preservation of a life lived and lost. But deeper inside, hidden beneath those boxes of memories, were the things that truly mattered. I moved aside a stack of boxes and revealed what lay beneath. A locked metal cabinet. Inside were the documents that had shaped my daughter's future, and that now might determine her survival. The prenuptial agreement. The document that Lucas didn't know existed. Sophia had signed it 3 days before their wedding, after a conversation with her mother, a conversation that had happened in the hospital when Carol knew her time was running out. She'd made Sophia promise to protect herself, to let me guide her toward legal protections that would keep her safe from men like Lucas. The trust documents. Created by Carol and me 12 years ago, long before we knew Lucas Torrance existed. The trust that owned the house. The trust that controlled the investment portfolio. The trust that was separate property, untouchable by a spouse, unaffected by divorce or death. Sophia was the sole beneficiary. The life insurance policy. $1 million payable directly to the trust. Not to Sophia individually. Not to me. To the trust. Which meant that even if something happened to me, even if Lucas somehow got access to my estate, the insurance would go directly to Sophia's protected assets. The will. Updated 6 months ago after I'd begun documenting Lucas's behavior. Everything I owned went to Sophia, but it went through the trust. Every asset was protected. Every dollar was shielded. The deed to the house. My name clear and simple. Not Sophia's. Not joint ownership. Just mine. The house that Lucas had tried so desperately to acquire. The house he'd convinced Sophia was the key to their future. It was the key to something all right, but not in the way he thought. And then there were the 3 years of documentation. 800 pages of journal entries. Photographs of bruises. Medical records from the hospital, where Sophia had gone reluctantly after one particularly violent incident. Emails I'd printed out. Text messages I'd screenshotted. A complete detailed forensic record of 3 years of abuse escalation and criminal behavior. I stood in the middle of that storage unit and understood something fundamental. I wasn't just protecting my daughter from a manipulative man. I was protecting her from a version of the future where she had nothing. where Lucas had isolated her so completely that she had no one to turn to, where he'd convinced her to liquidate everything, the house, the trust, the insurance in service of his control, where he'd slowly, methodically turned her into a woman with no resources, no support, no way out. I was protecting her from a future where I was dead and she was alone with him, because that's what Lucas wanted. That's what his plan had always been. Get rid of me, the one person she might run to, the one person she might still listen to. Take the insurance money. Use that money to further isolate her, further control, her further remake her into the image he wanted. And then once she was completely broken, completely dependent, completely his, take everything else. The house, the trust, the investments. All of it. I looked at the locked cabinet containing all these documents, and I understood Lucas's desperation with perfect clarity. He'd been patient for 3 years, but he knew the endgame had to come soon. He knew that the longer he waited, the more likely it was that Sophia would wake up, that she'd see the truth, that she'd escape. So he was accelerating. He was trying to break into the storage unit because he knew somehow that it contained the proof of his plans. He was asking about my schedule because he was trying to figure out how to access me. He was making calls to someone he trusted enough to help him. The next step was clear. He was going to move against me. And when he did, he was betting that I wouldn't have time to protect what I'd built. He was betting that Sophia would be too grief-stricken, too broken, too confused to hold on to the trust documents and the prenuptial agreement and the insurance policies. He was betting that he could still win. I ran my hand over the metal cabinet. Inside this box was everything, the proof, the protection, the future I'd secured for my daughter without her knowledge, without her understanding, with only the guidance of a dying woman who'd seen something in me that I hadn't fully seen in myself. Carol had known. She'd somehow understood that the world was full of men like Lucas. Men who saw women as assets to be acquired. Men who confused control with love. Men who would destroy everything in their path to get what they wanted. And she'd made sure before she died that our daughter would have protection, that she'd have options, that she'd have a way out. I left the storage unit that night, understanding something with absolute certainty. The battle that was coming would be the most important battle of my life. Not because of the money, not because of the house, but because everything I'd protected, everything Carol had asked me to protect, was now at stake. And Lucas was betting he could take it all. Just a few hours later, close to midnight, Jacob called me. His voice was low, strained, and urgent in a way I had never heard before. "Vincent, I need to see you. Now. Lucas has been following me, and I think I know what he's planning." I told him to come to my house immediately. When Jacob arrived, he was shaking, but not from fear. It was anger contained, controlled, and barely held back. "I was at the park," he said, pacing my living room. "Just walking, trying to clear my head after everything we've been planning. And then I noticed a car. Same car behind me for 15 minutes straight. When I stopped, it stopped. When I walked, it crawled along beside me." "Lucas," I said quietly. "Lucas," Jacob confirmed. So I pretended I didn't notice. I walked into a hardware store, and Vincent, he followed me inside. Jacob stopped pacing and looked at me. He wasn't browsing. He knew exactly what he was there for. "What did he buy?" I asked. "Things you don't buy together unless you're planning something violent," Jacob said. "Rope, plastic sheeting, chemicals, supplies you use when you want to hurt someone and make it look like an accident." He pulled out his phone and opened a video recorded from his smartwatch. The footage was clear enough. Lucas stood in the aisle, focused, calm, selecting items with deliberate care. No hesitation, no distraction, just quiet certainty. "He never noticed I was recording," Jacob said. He was too sure of himself. I stared at the screen. My son-in-law shopping like a man preparing for a weekend project, not like someone planning to end a life. Why would he risk being seen, I asked, though the answer was already forming. "Because he's desperate," Jacob said. "He knows about the storage unit. He knows you have evidence, and he knows that once Sophia sees it, she'll leave him. She'll take the house, the insurance, everything. He'll be finished. Something cold and sharp settled inside my chest. He's not after the house anymore, I said slowly. He never was. No, Jacob agreed. He's after the life insurance. $2 million. Once you're gone, the money goes to Sophia. And once she's grieving, confused, vulnerable, he'll control the narrative. He'll guide her decisions. He'll convince her it's for their future. And by the time she realizes what happened, the money will be gone. I sat down heavily. The plan was horrifying in its simplicity. Remove me, access the insurance, reassert control over Sophia, take the money, disappear, then start the same cycle somewhere else. It would have worked if Jacob hadn't been paying attention. If I hadn't documented everything. If we hadn't already prepared. We're out of time, I said, standing. We can't wait anymore. We have to act. I called the police department's non-emergency line and asked to speak with someone about an immediate threat. When Detective Robert Lambert came on the phone, I laid everything out. I have evidence that someone is planning to harm me, I said. Video of him purchasing materials. 3 years of documentation of escalating abuse and threats. Recorded conversations. A credible witness. Can you come to the station? Lambert asked. I can, I said. But understand, this man is dangerous. He's already been violent. He's already made threats. And based on what we have, his plan is imminent. We'll put a patrol car outside your house tonight, Lambert said. Bring everything you have. After I hung up, I looked at Jacob. You're staying here tonight. I don't want you alone. What about Sophia? He asked. She's safe for now, I said. Lucas thinks he still has time. He doesn't know we're moving. We spent the night assembling everything. I retrieved copies of my journals, screenshots of messages, photographs. Jacob and I reviewed the video frame by frame, documenting each item Lucas purchased and the timestamp. By 3 a.m, we had a complete evidence package. Abuse, threats, surveillance, preparation for violence. I called Stephen Garrett's emergency line. I need you to know there's a credible threat against my life, I told him. I'm going to the police in the morning. If anything happens to me, you'll know exactly who to point them to. Vincent, what's happening? He asked. Lucas is planning to kill me, I said. We have proof, and we're stopping him. When morning came, Jacob and I drove to the station with everything. Detective Lambert met us privately and spent 4 hours reviewing the evidence. The journals, the bruises, the recordings, the video, the investigators' reports. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim. We're bringing him in for questioning, Lambert said, and we're applying for warrants to search his residence and vehicle. As we left the station, something shifted inside me. For 3 years, I had watched, documented, and waited. And Lucas had finally revealed himself completely. He'd escalated past the point of return. He'd shown his true face, and now at last, the system would see it too. The detective came to my house the next morning. Albert Kingston was a man in his mid-40s with the kind of face that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. He spent 2 hours reviewing everything, the journal, the photographs, the video Jacob had recorded, the surveillance reports. When he was finished, he sat across from me in my study and said words that turned my blood to ice. Mr. Ashford, we need to take this extremely seriously. Based on the evidence you've provided, your son-in-law fits the profile of someone planning something catastrophic. What do? I asked. We're going to maintain surveillance on him, Kingston said. We're going to monitor his movements, his communications, everything. But Mr. Ashford, you need to protect yourself. Don't be alone. Don't accept food or drinks from him. Don't let him get close to you. And if you see anything unusual, anything at all, you call us immediately. Do you understand? I understand, I said. After Kingston left, I sat in the silence of my house and understood something fundamental. Time was no longer abstract. The danger was no longer theoretical. It was imminent. It was real. It was happening now. I picked up my phone and called Sophia. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Sweetheart, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you," I said. "Dad, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "Lucas," I said, and I could hear her intake of breath. "Lucas has done things, Sophia, things that the police are currently investigating, and I need you to trust me for the first time in 3 years." There was silence on the other end. Then, "What do you mean the police are investigating? What are you talking about?" "Yeah, I can't explain everything over the phone," I said. "But I need you to come home, to this house, right now." "Dad, Lucas said you would do this," Sophia said, and there was doubt in her voice. "He said you would try to turn me against him. He said you were trying to control me." I could hear him in the background. I could hear him telling her not to listen to me. I could hear the manipulation even through the phone. "Sophia, I know what he's told you," I said calmly. "I know he's told you I'm controlling. I know he's told you I don't understand your love. I know he's made you doubt me, but I'm asking you as your father to trust me on this one thing. Please, come home." I don't know," Sophia said, and I could hear the fear in her voice. Fear of me. Fear of Lucas. Fear of making the wrong choice. "Sophia, listen to me," I said, my voice steady. "The police have evidence, real evidence, of things Lucas has done, things he's planning to do. I need you safe. I need you here where I can protect you, just for a few days. Please." "But Lucas says—" I know what Lucas says," I interrupted gently. "I know everything he's said. And Sophia, I'm asking you to come home anyway. Not because you have to believe me, but because you need to be safe." There was another pause, a long one. Then Sophia said very quietly, "Okay, Dad, I'll come home." "When?" I asked. "Today. I'll tell Lucas I need to visit you. He won't like it, but okay, I'll come today." "I love you, Sophia," I said. "I love you too, Dad," she replied, and her voice was small, uncertain, but it was there. After we hung up, I sat in my study and exhaled slowly. One piece was in place. Sophia was coming home. She would be safe, and once she was here, once she could see the documentation for herself, once she could understand the scope of what Lucas had done, she would finally be able to make a choice from a place of safety rather than fear. But even as I felt relief, I also felt the weight of what was coming. Lucas would discover that Sophia had left. Lucas would understand that his plan was falling apart, and a man whose plan is falling apart is at his most dangerous. I called Jacob. "Sophia's coming home today. I need you here." "I'm on my way," Jacob said. I called Stephen Garrett. "Sophia is coming here. I want her protected legally. I want everything in place." "I'm preparing the documentation now," Stephen said. "When she arrives, we'll make sure she understands her options." For the next few hours, I waited. I checked the security cameras. I made sure the doors were locked. I reviewed the documentation one more time, preparing myself for the conversation that was coming. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, a car pulled into my driveway. Sophia got out, and even from a distance I could see that she looked afraid. Afraid of me, afraid of Lucas, afraid of everything. But she was here. I walked out to meet her, and when I saw her face, really saw it, I understood what 3 years of Lucas had done to her. She was thinner, smaller. The light in her eyes had dimmed to almost nothing. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, and I pulled her into a hug. She was stiff at first, uncertain. But then she leaned into me and I felt something break open inside my chest. Jacob arrived 15 minutes later. Then Stephen Garrett. And in my living room, surrounded by the people who loved her, Sophia finally heard the full truth. I opened the leather journal. I showed her the pages. I read the entries aloud. And with each page I watched her realize something. None of this was her imagination. None of this was her fault. All of it was real, documented, undeniable. By the time I finished reading, Sophia was crying. Not angry tears, not defensive tears, but the tears of someone who finally understands that she's been trapped and that escape is possible. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you." "It's not your fault," I said. "And Sophia, the worst part isn't over yet. But you're safe now. And that's what matters. Before the confrontation happens, I need to ask you, would you do what I did? Comment below, just write yes or no. Let me know you're still listening. But first, a note. The story coming next blends real events with some creative elements for impact. If you'd rather not continue, that's okay. Just close the video now. Lucas arrived at my house the next evening. He was angry in a way I'd never seen before. The mask had completely fallen away. He pounded on the door. When I opened it, he pushed past me into the living room. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Where's Sophia?" "She's upstairs," I said calmly. "And you need to leave." "She's my wife," Lucas said, his voice rising. "You're filling her head with lies. You're trying to turn her against me. Give her back to me." "Sophia is staying here," I said quietly. "And you're going to leave now." Lucas's face twisted with rage. "You don't understand what you're doing, old man. You think you're protecting her. You're destroying her. And you're destroying me. That's not going to end well for you." I didn't respond. I just stood there watching him understand that manipulation wouldn't work anymore. That intimidation wouldn't work either. That he'd lost. "Give me what's mine," he said, and his voice had changed. It was cold now. Calculating. Dangerous. "The house. The money. Sophia. Give me what I earned." "You haven't earned anything," I said. "You've taken everything, and it stops now." Lucas lunged at me. His hands went for my throat. For a moment, I felt the full weight of his desperation, his rage, his refusal to accept that he'd lost. But I wasn't alone. Jacob came through the back door exactly as we'd planned. He grabbed Lucas and threw him away from me with a force born of 3 years of watching what this man had done to my daughter. "Get your hands off him," Jacob said, his voice deadly calm. Lucas spun on Jacob. They grappled for a moment, Lucas throwing wild punches, Jacob blocking, redirecting, keeping Lucas away from both of us. Then the front door burst open. Detective Kingston and 2 uniformed officers entered with weapons drawn. They'd been waiting outside the entire time, ready for exactly this moment. "Lucas Torrance, you're under arrest," Kingston said. Lucas fought. Of course he fought. He screamed that this was a setup. He screamed that I was the one who deserved to be arrested. He screamed that everyone was against him, that no one understood him, that this was all unfair. But as they put the handcuffs on him, as they began to read him his rights, as they started to search him, something shifted. They found it all. Materials for violence, photographs of my house, my daily routes, my schedule, insurance documents, bank statements showing his accounts were nearly empty, text messages discussing plans to eliminate the problem. Everything. It was all there. All the evidence that had been missing before. All the proof that Lucas Torrance had escalated from abuse to murder planning. From upstairs, Sophia watched it all. I looked up and saw her standing at the top of the staircase, her hand on the railing. She was watching Lucas be led away in handcuffs. She was watching the police officers document evidence. She was watching the man she'd been trying to protect, the man she'd believed loved her, reveal his true nature in his rage and his threats. And I saw something break open inside her. Not in a bad way. in the way that breaking open can be necessary, in the way that sometimes you have to see the truth, no matter how brutal, before you can begin to heal. Jacob put a hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm okay." Standing in my living room, watching Lucas Torrance being led away by police. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt relief. The kind of relief that comes when a weight you've been carrying for 3 years finally gets lifted. Relief that it was over. Relief that Sophia had seen the truth. Relief that Jacob had been there. Relief that the system had worked, had listened, had acted when it mattered. Relief that we were all still alive. Later, after the police had left, after they'd documented everything, after Kingston had assured me that Lucas would be held without bail, given the severity of the charges, I went upstairs to find Sophia. She was in her childhood bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Broken. Lost. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, sitting down beside her. She didn't say anything. She just leaned against me and I held her while she cried. Not tears of sadness. Tears of release. Tears of finally understanding that what had happened to her wasn't her fault. That the man she'd tried to love had been trying to destroy her. That her father had been right all along. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered. "No," I said, holding her tighter. "No apologies. None of this was your fault. You were manipulated by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate you. That's not your fault. That's his evil." We sat there for a long time. Jacob brought tea. Stephen called to confirm that the legal protections were in place. The private investigator sent a final report. The police sent updates about the charges being filed. And slowly, very slowly, Sophia began to understand that the nightmare was over. But even as I held my daughter, even as I felt the weight of 3 years beginning to lift, I understood something else. The hardest part wasn't arresting Lucas. The hardest part would be helping Sophia understand what had happened to her. The hardest part would be rebuilding her sense of trust, her sense of safety, her sense of self. The hardest part would be the healing that came after. The next morning, I did something I'd been planning to do for 3 years. I took Sophia to the storage unit, and I opened it for her. She stepped inside and stopped. The space before her was exactly as I'd left it. Boxes stacked carefully, furniture pushed to the sides. The accumulated weight of memories and protection organized in a way only I understood. "What is all this?" Sophia asked quietly. "This is your mother," I said simply. Sophia walked forward slowly, and when she saw the boxes of Carol's things, she broke. Her hand went to her mouth. Tears started streaming down her face. "Mom's clothes," she whispered, pulling out a sweater. It still smelled like Carol, like lavender and the particular scent of someone you love. "Dad, why didn't you tell me you had these?" "Because I was saving them," I said. "I was saving them for you, for a moment like this." Sophia held the sweater against her chest and cried the kind of cry that comes from deep inside, from a place where loss and love are the same thing. After she'd spent time with her mother's belongings, after she'd touched the books Carol had loved, and looked through the photo albums from before Sophia was born, I showed her the rest. I opened the metal cabinet and revealed what lay inside. The prenuptial agreement, I said, showing her the first document. "Your mother insisted on this. She knew the world was dangerous and she wanted to protect you." Then the trust documents. "These ensure that the house, the investments, the insurance, all of it is yours. Separate property. Untouchable by anyone else. Yours." And finally, the journal. I opened it carefully, reverently, and began to read excerpts. Not the entire 3 years, just the passages that showed the pattern most clearly. June 15th, 2021. I watched Lucas check Sophia's phone while she was in the bathroom. She didn't even realize. When she came back, she thanked him for caring so much. Sophia listened, her face growing paler with each entry. September 3rd, 2021. Lucas told Sophia that Jacob has always had feelings for her, that he's trying to steal her away. I watched my daughter believe him. I watched her doubt the man who's been her friend for her entire life. February 12th, 2023. I saw Sophia flinch when Lucas raised his voice. Just raised his voice. She apologized immediately for upsetting him. March 20th, 2023. Sophia told me that Lucas pushed her into a wall. She called it an intense moment. She said she deserved it for talking back. When I finished reading, Sophia was shaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you wait?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said honestly. "Lucas had already convinced you that I was the enemy. If I'd confronted you with this documentation, you would have thought I was trying to manipulate you. You would have clung to him even tighter. But I was suffering," Sophia said, anger mixing with the tears. "I was suffering and you knew." "And I know," I said. "And that broke my heart every single day. But I also knew that the only way to save you was to document everything, to be patient, and to wait for the moment when you could finally see the truth on your own terms." Sophia raged then. Not at me, at Lucas, at herself, at the years she'd lost, at the lies she'd believed, at the version of herself she'd become under his control. She raged for an hour, and I let her. Because rage, when it's directed at the right target, is healing. When the rage passed, I showed her the letter. It was in Carol's handwriting, sealed in an envelope marked, "For Sophia when she needs her mother most." Sophia opened it with trembling hands. "My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong. I've left this letter with your father because I know him. I know he will protect you with the kind of love that doesn't demand gratitude, doesn't ask for recognition, and doesn't give up even when you push him away. I need to tell you something important. The people who love us truly will never ask us to choose between them and ourselves. If someone, a boyfriend, a husband, a friend, ever makes you feel like you have to choose between your own safety and their happiness, that is not love. That is control. And control is the opposite of love. Your father has spent his life protecting you. Not controlling you. Protecting you. There is a difference, and I pray you come to understand it. I love you more than anything in this world, and I will always be with you, watching over you, believing in you. Love, Mom." Sophia read the letter twice, 3 times. By the 4th time, she was sobbing not in anger but in understanding, in gratitude, in the realization that her mother had known, that her mother had prepared her father for this moment, that even in death Carol was protecting her. "Ma, she knew," Sophia whispered. "Mom knew that something like this might happen. She knew the world," I said gently. "And she knew that love without boundaries could be dangerous. So she made sure you would have protection. Legal protection. Financial protection. And a father who would never stop fighting for you even when you hated him for it." That night, sitting in that storage unit surrounded by the evidence of 3 years of love disguised as documentation, Sophia finally understood. She understood that the prison she'd been living in wasn't her father's rules. It was Lucas's lies. She understood that the man she'd been trying to love had been trying to destroy her. She understood that her father had been right all along. And most importantly, she understood that love, real love, sometimes looks like patience. Sometimes looks like waiting. Sometimes looks like documenting abuse in a leather journal and keeping it safe, not because you want to control someone, but because you're desperately, hopelessly trying to save them. The weeks that followed were the most difficult of Sophia's life. Not because she regretted leaving Lucas, but because she had to face what she'd missed, what she'd accepted, what she'd allowed someone else to do to her. She moved back into my house. She started seeing a therapist named Dr. Miranda, who specialized in abuse recovery. And slowly, painfully, she began the work of understanding what had happened to her. I watched her read through the leather journal. all 800 pages of it. I watched her relive 3 years of observations, 3 years of her father watching her suffer and waiting for the right moment to act. There were days when she was angry at me, days when she'd say, "Why didn't you just tell me? Why did you wait?" And each time I'd explain, "Because Lucas had convinced you that I was the enemy. If I'd confronted you without evidence, you would have clung to him even tighter. I had to wait for the moment when you could see the truth on your own terms." The legal proceedings moved forward. Lucas was charged with attempted murder, domestic violence, financial abuse, and insurance fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. The video, the journal, Jacob's testimony, the surveillance reports, the financial records. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Sophia had to testify. She had to sit in a courtroom and describe in front of her abuser the ways he'd hurt her. The bruises, the lies, the isolation, the fear. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, Sophia wept. Not with joy, with relief, with the understanding that she'd been believed, that what had happened to her was real, documented, and finally acknowledged. Lucas was sentenced to 15 years in prison. In the months that followed, Vincent and Sophia began the slow work of rebuilding their relationship. There were family dinners where they ate together in comfortable silence. There were conversations where Sophia asked questions, and I answered them honestly. There were moments when she hugged me without hesitation, and I felt the distance of 3 years begin to close. Sophia attended therapy twice a week. She worked through the trauma. She learned to recognize the signs of manipulation. She learned the difference between protection and control. She learned that love didn't mean losing yourself. And Jacob was there. Always there. He'd come over on Sunday afternoons. He'd sit in the living room and talk with Sophia about inconsequential things. He'd ask her about her therapy. He'd never push. He'd never demand anything. He was simply present, steady, reliable. One afternoon, about 2 months after Lucas's conviction, Sophia pulled me aside. "Dad, I've been reading through your journal again," she said. "The whole thing. And I realized something." "What's that?" I asked. "I realize how much you loved me," she said, and her voice was small. "I knew you loved me, but I didn't understand the way you loved me. I didn't understand that every time you were silent, you were being patient. Every time you documented something, you were gathering proof to save me. Every time you waited, you were giving me a chance to come to my own understanding." She paused, tears running down her face. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it," she said. "There's nothing to apologize for," I said, pulling her into a hug. "You were being manipulated by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate you. That's not your fault." Over the following months, Sophia continued her healing. The therapy continued. The support from Jacob continued. The slow rebuilding of trust between father and daughter continued. And then one afternoon, Sophia asked me something that changed everything. We were sitting in the kitchen, and she was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before something important. "Dad," she said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. "About Jacob," she said, and I saw a blush creep across her face. "I want to know if you think it would be okay if I asked him out on a date. A real date. Not as friends. As something more." I felt something shift inside me. I'd been waiting for this moment. I'd seen it coming for months, the way Jacob looked at Sophia, the way she'd started to look at him, back the way trust rebuilding slowly had begun to transform into something else. "What do you want to know?" I asked gently. Sophia blushed deeper. "You think it would be okay?" "Sweetheart," I said, "I think that would be the best thing that could happen. Jacob has loved you for a long time. But he waited. He waited until you were ready. He waited until you could choose him freely, without fear, without manipulation, without anyone else's agenda. That's what real love looks like, Sophia. That's the kind of love I hope you'll let him show you." That evening, Sophia called Jacob. I could hear her voice from the living room, nervous, hopeful, alive, in a way she hadn't been in years. And when Jacob arrived an hour later, when Sophia went out the door with him, when I watched them drive away together, I understood something profound. I'd spent 3 years documenting abuse. I'd spent 3 years gathering evidence against someone who was trying to destroy my daughter. I'd spent 3 years waiting for the moment when I could finally act, but all of that had been preparation for this moment. For the moment when my daughter would be free enough, healed enough, whole enough to choose love on her own terms. And that I realized was the real victory. Not the arrest, not the conviction, not the evidence. The real victory was seeing my daughter smile again, truly smile, without fear underneath it. 1 year after Lucas's arrest, I was sitting in my living room when Sophia came in with Jacob. My daughter looked happy in a way I hadn't seen in years, but it wasn't the desperate, frantic happiness she'd worn with Lucas. This was quiet. This was real. "Dad," Sophia said, sitting down beside me, "Jacob and I wanted to talk to you." I looked at them, really looked at them. The way Jacob's hand rested gently on Sophia's back. The way Sophia leaned toward him without hesitation. The way they looked at each other with something that resembled peace. "We're taking things slowly," Sophia said. "We're not rushing, but we're committed to building something together." I smiled, because I could see the difference. With Lucas, Sophia had been constantly anxious, always monitoring his moods. With Jacob, she was relaxed. She laughed freely. She made decisions without fear. A few weeks later, Sophia asked me to do something I'd been waiting for. "Dad, can we go back to the storage unit?" she asked. We drove there on a Saturday morning. When we unlocked the door, I felt something settle inside me. This place had been a fortress, a secret, a burden I'd carried alone, but now it was just a room. Together, Sophia and I began to sort through Carol's belongings. Some things we donated, some things we brought home, Carol's favorite books, her photo albums, her jewelry. The storage unit, once a vault of secrets, became simply what it was meant to be, a place of memories. When we got to the locked cabinet, Sophia asked the question I'd been expecting. "Dad, what about your journal?" "It's yours," I said. "If you want it. So you'll always remember how hard you fought to get here." Sophia took the leather journal and held it carefully. Over the following months, I watched my daughter build a life nothing like the one she'd lived with Lucas. She continued therapy. She returned to work. She reconnected with friends. And she and Jacob moved slowly through a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine choice. One evening, I found her reading the journal. When she saw me, she looked up with tears in her eyes. "I'm reading about the day Lucas first came to dinner," she said. "You knew something was wrong from the beginning, didn't you?" "I had a feeling," I admitted, "but I couldn't prove it. So I waited, and I documented, and I prepared." "And it was right," Sophia said quietly. As the year progressed, I found myself increasingly at peace. Not because the trauma had disappeared, it would always be part of our story, but because the purpose had been fulfilled. Sophia was safe. She was healing. She was building a healthy relationship with someone who loved her, without conditions, without control, without manipulation. One afternoon, watching Jacob and Sophia laugh together in the kitchen, I thought about what Carol had said. The greatest gift a parent can give their child is not protection from pain. It's the strength to survive it. I'd spent 3 years giving Sophia that strength through silence, through documentation, through patient preparation. Now she was finally free to use it. People sometimes ask if I regret waiting so long, if I regret not telling Sophia what I knew. The truth is, I've made peace with my choices. I didn't tell Sophia because she wasn't ready. I didn't act because I didn't have proof. I remained silent, because sometimes silence is the hardest form of protection. And I kept that storage unit secret because the strongest thing a father can do is prepare quietly for a storm he hopes will never come. But if it does, he's ready. My daughter is safe. She's building a real life. And Carol would be proud. Not because of what happened, but because of how we survived it. That storage unit taught me something I never expected. The greatest legacy is not money or property. It's knowing that someone loved you enough to protect you. Even when you couldn't see it, and even when you thought they were the enemy. That's the real secret hidden in that storage unit downtown. Not insurance documents, but something far more valuable, the knowledge that a father's love is patience. It's silence when necessary. And sometimes it's the quiet preparation that saves everything. And to you listening to this story, remember this. What happened to my family, this family story, is not unique. Abuse looks different for every person, but the pattern is always the same. Isolation, control, manipulation. And when that fails, escalation. I'm Vincent Ashford, and I'm telling you this family story because I made mistakes. I waited too long. I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I documented instead of acting sooner. Don't do what I did. Don't wait for perfect proof before you speak up. Don't let silence become your excuse. If you see abuse happening in your family, in your friend's relationship, anywhere, don't be like me. This isn't about dad revenge. This isn't about getting even. This isn't a dad revenge story designed to satisfy anger. Justice isn't revenge. Real justice is naming the truth out loud and getting help. Because dad revenge isn't the answer. Real protection is. If you're in an abusive situation and you don't have resources, reach out to a domestic violence hotline. They have free help. They have people who will listen. They will believe you. This family story isn't just entertainment. It's a warning. It's a map. Use it. I also want to be clear, I was fortunate. I had resources. I had a storage unit. I had a lawyer. I had documentation. Not everyone has these things, but everyone deserves help. Everyone deserves protection. This is a family story about patience, about protection, and about a father's desperate love. But it's also a cautionary tale. Abuse is real. Abusers are calculating, and they don't stop on their own. If this family story resonated with you, please comment below. Share your own story. Subscribe to this channel for more accounts of survival and resilience, because your voice matters. And thank you truly, deeply, thank you for listening until the very end. Before we finish, fair warning, the stories coming next contain fictional elements crafted for educational purposes. They explore real patterns of abuse, manipulation, and recovery. If this content isn't right for you, please step away and choose something more suitable. But if you're ready to hear more, I'll be here. Take care of yourselves.
언제 왔냐고? 5시? 오늘 초밥 상사했는데 100개 안 터져서 망했음. 택시 탔어? 어디서 하는데요? 상동이 어디지? 여기 다이소네. 주사위 소국토, 주사위 버스여행. 그러니까 주사위로 뭘 하는 건데? 시장 방송이 재밌냐? 여행 방송, 시장 방송이 재밌냐? 아니, 뭔지 알아? 내가 하면은 있잖아.